on redistricting to order Tuesday, May 11th, here a little after 5. So it's good to see everybody again. Thank you for joining. It's been a while. We're back in January when we met last for a couple of sessions there on a Friday. I know I heard some feedback on that, so we're going to have it tonight instead. So it's good to be here. It's good to see you all back again. Tonight we have just 2 items on the agenda. We'll do Senate File 1715 first. That's a Senator Kiffmeyer bill. And then we'll follow that up with 2308, which is a Senator Isaacson bill. At this point, everybody knows we've seen the apportionment numbers come out, and it's actually kind of a surprise. We were able to save all 8 of our federal seats, which actually I was not expecting. I don't think very many people were, by 89 people, it sounds like, in the state of Minnesota. So it's exciting to have that. That kind of reduces the problems that we might have in redistricting and all the rearranging that we'd have on the federal level. So that's good to see, plus the benefits of having 8 representatives on the federal level. So that is really the new information. Other than that, we're still waiting for the census block data, which appears still to be sometime in mid-August. Hopefully that data is usable around that time, or within to probably September, before everybody is able to really start working with the data. But that's still the time frame that I've been given, unless there's been an update on that I haven't seen in the last couple of days. So we're just working on the principles here today with those 2 bills. I think with that, unless there's other comments anybody would like to make, I think we'll move on.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Senator Isaacson.
I just want to confirm a couple of things and then ask you to speculate about something, which I know we all love to do.
Wonderful.
First, I'm confirming that both bills will be laid over today. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator.
And then do we have an idea of whether or not we're going to see either of these bills on the floor before the end of session, or are we going to wait on that?
The bills will not be on the floor before the end of session.
Okay. And then the second thing is, would you speculate on if we see ourselves taking up business in the interim as a committee, whether it's either to do some of the work we can do in advance when it has to do with like talking to different groups that care about their districts and what they look like, or that kind of stuff, or what do you envision being the kind of path forward over the next couple of months if we're not going to do much more than this after today in formal session?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Isaacson. I think that's a really good question. We don't have the data and we can't develop the maps, but we can do a lot of the work going around the state, listening to communities of interest, listening to individuals that have a stake in the outcome of redistricting. And that's what I intend to continue to do. It's been a tradition of the Senate to do that and get that input. So my intent is to do that. We don't have a schedule quite yet on that, but I hope to have something put together here after session so that we can spend some time. I don't know what the format's going to be, if we're going to end up doing Zoom or if we're going to be able to go out. I would really like to get out on the road and get into some different areas. So, yeah.
So, yeah, no, one last question. So and I'm, it's chair's prerogative and what you guys want to do in the majority. So I'm just trying to understand it. If we're not going to push either of these bills to the floor, what purpose are they serving right now then? I know we at some point need to do it, right? So I'm okay with that. But are you envisioning that we'll probably look at passing these bills prior to passing some version of a map when we get back next year, assuming that a special session doesn't occur? Is that kind of your plan, or is there like a step-by-step plan you guys have moving forward for how this will work? Like, first we'll do redistricting principles when we get back, and then we're going to move on to other things as we lead up to passing a map at some point, or what are you thinking in terms of a timeline?
Right. Yeah. And I think going forward, then once we get the input and we get the data, then we can start compiling our maps. I'm hoping that whether it's a special session or next year in regular session, if we're able to determine a map that we like and we're able to pass it, we've got to go by some principles. So we're setting the foundation then for what those principles will be. And I wanted to make sure that we had time to hear the different competing proposals for those principles. So this is really an opportunity to air out what those ideas might be. So
I appreciate that.
That's kind of
Thank you.
the angle we're going. Thank you, Senator Isaacson. All right, with that, Senator Kiffmeyer, to your bill, Senate File 1750.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Glad to be with everyone today. And so Senate File 1715 has to do with redistricting principles. But Mr. Chair, before I go into explaining what they are, I have the A3 amendment that I would like to move and have Ms. Lexi Stengel explain it. It's a technical amendment, so it's best if she would explain it, if you could.
Senator Kiffmeyer moves the A1 amendment. Ms. Stengel, would you like to speak on that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Excuse me, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's the A3 amendment, and all it does is add a subdivision to Section 1 that specifies that the principles apply to legislative districts. As a drafting oversight that this wasn't included. If you look at Section 2, there's a similar subdivision there for congressional redistricting, so this is just a bit of cleanup.
All right. Senator Kiffmeyer, anything else on that?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right. Microphone's on, camera's on. All those in favor of the A3 amendment, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right. Amendment passes and the bill is in order. To you, Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members. So Senate File 1715 as amended includes principles of redistricting. And the first one has to do with nesting. A state house district must not be divided in the formation of a state senate district. And then the second one is on numbering. And so, Mr. Chair, you get to be number one in the sequence as you are today. That's been a custom to start the numbering in the northwest corner of the state and proceed as described here in the bill. And the population is the next principle. Redistricting plans for state legislatures must faithfully adhere to the concept of population-based representation. The population of a legislative district must not deviate by more than 2% from the population of the ideal district. Subdivision 4 is minority representation. That is the next principle. Legislative districts must not be drawn with either the purpose or effect of denying or abridging the voting rights of any United States citizen on account of race, ethnicity, or membership in a language minority group, and must otherwise comply with the 14th and 15th Amendments to the United States Constitution and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 as amended. The next principle that is in this bill is convenient, contiguous, and compact districts. This has always been the one that is very important. Legislative districts must consist of convenient, contiguous, territory structured into compact units. Contiguity by water is sufficient if the body of water does not pose a serious obstacle to travel within the district. Legislative districts with areas that connect only at a single point must not be considered contiguous. This is very important, Mr. Chair, as we are a state with over 10,000 lakes. And so it's likely that redistricting might be affected by a body of water. Subdivision 6 principle is preservation of political subdivisions, not divided more than necessary to meet constitutional requirements. And related to that is communities of interest. Where possible, in compliance with the preceding principles, communities of interest must be preserved. So communities of interest include, but not limited to, groups of Minnesota citizens with clearly recognizable similarities of social, geographic, political, cultural, ethnic, economic, or other interests. And the 8th principle is in regards to incumbents. Legislative districts must not be drawn for the purpose of protecting or defeating an incumbent, but the impact of redistricting on incumbent office holders is a factor subordinate to all redistricting criteria that the legislature may consider to determine whether proposed plans result in either undue incumbent protection or excessive incumbent conflicts. The next portion of the bill, Section 2, has to do with congressional redistricting principles. So these principles are very much like the legislature. Again, the numbering starts, in this case, though, with the southeast corner instead of the northwest, and the population as nearly equal. So in the legislative districts, it has been plus or minus 2%, and in congressional districts, as nearly equal, meaning as practicable, meant to be one vote, but as nearly equal. So much tighter drawing of the lines. The next principle for congressional districts is minority representation. And this is the same as what we saw in the legislative districts. Convenient, contiguous, and compact districts. Again, the same language as what you will see in the legislative districts of the state. And the next principle, preservation of political subdivision.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. There's a lot of background talking I can hear. It's kind of disrupting my ability to hear Senator Kiffmeyer.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't hearing that on my end.
No.
That's
here.
weird. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
All right.
Let's see. And the communities of interest are also the same principle as you would have seen in the legislative districts, and the same with incumbents. So the main difference between congressional and legislative has to do with the population deviation. The next section 3 has to do with redistricting plans data. The geographic areas and population counts used in maps, tables, and legal descriptions must be those used by the GIS Office of the Legislative Coordinating Commission. The population, and by the way, this is a joint office between the House and Senate. The population counts must be the block population counts provided to the state under Public Law 94-171 after each decennial census, subject to correction of any errors acknowledged by the United States Census Bureau. So it gives us a basis for the actual data. What do we base it on? And subdivision, parenthetical B, a redistricting plan must not be considered for adoption by the Senate or House until the redistricting plan's block equivalency file has been submitted to the GIS office in a form prescribed by the GIS office. The block equivalency file must show the district to which each census block has been assigned. And census blocks are the building blocks, essentially, of all the data and all the population. So, and this act would be effective following final enactment and applies to any plan enacted or established on or after that date, which is in section 4. So, Mr. Chair and members, these are the principles that have been used in Minnesota in previous redistrictings, and by any accounts have resulted in a fair redistricting plan. These are tried and true principles that have been used over a number of decades, and that is why I've included them in the Senate File 1715 as amended. So, Mr. Chair, that is the bill before us today.
Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. Questions, members?
Mr. Chair.
Senator Isaacson.
Thank you. Senator Kiffmeyer, I noticed, and I want to just make sure I heard this correctly. When you were speaking about the incumbents, you had said that they play a role lastly, and is that mostly just as a reflection in your mind to make sure we don't do anything that's by accident, unintentionally, that would put a group of people for whatever reason in a tough spot? Or is there any other circumstances that incumbents are being viewed as a part of this map?
Senator Kiffmeyer.
Again, these are tried and true principles that have been used by the state of Minnesota in the courts. And so the language just says, must not be drawn for the purpose of protecting or defeating an incumbent. But the impact of redistricting on incumbent office holders is a factor, but it's subordinate to all redistricting criteria that the legislature may consider to determine whether proposed plans result in either undue incumbent protection or excessive incumbent conflicts. I think the language itself, not drawn for that purpose, but the impact is a factor, but it's subordinate. So that's specifically with the language and what has been used previously.
Thank you.
Senator Isaacson. Okay, any further questions? Seeing none, we'll lay this over. So thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer, for your presentation tonight. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members.
We'll now move on to Senate File 2308. Senator Isaacson, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this time, and I appreciate the opportunity to hear it. I know that we're running late and we had to go through rules, but it's been I really appreciate the chance for us to have this conversation. I also can appreciate the significance of the efforts that Senator Kiffmeyer is pushing forward, given her background and experience in these areas, and appreciate the principles she's brought forth. I don't know that we differ a great deal, other than a couple of line items and maybe the order of things. Initially, when it talked about the principles, as you know, or maybe don't know yet, our bill goes beyond that, though, and we think there's some other things that should be added in this process. And so I'll go through that. Our redistricting principles bill essentially has three parts to it. The first part is somewhat analogous to what Senator Kiffmeyer did with the principles. But I want to say first that obviously our goal is beyond the politics and the partisanship to create a map that is done in a way that's fair for all Minnesotans in a process that's abundantly transparent. As someone who has been on the record and offered bills that takes this out of the legislature's hands, I believe that if that's not the case, then I think what we need to do is really be focused on providing a process that's above reproach, that there could be no question that this was done in a way with only one intent in mind, and that's to have a fair map that represents the best representation of Minnesota through its Senate districts. We talk about this bill in three ways. One, we talk about the principles. That's what I'm going to go through first, but there's also an evaluation section that we put in there, and then a report section we also added in an attempt to create some more transparency and kind of really walk you through how we're thinking about things. And it goes back to my question, and I'll hit on that in a second, that I had asked Senator Kiffmeyer about her bill when it comes to incumbents. But first, let's talk about the principles. As you know, numbering is subdivision 2. It's the first principle. Nesting, obviously, is required by the Constitution. We have subdivision 4, cannot favor a party or candidate, and we also limit the use of incumbents' addresses when creating the map in an effort to make sure that there is no confusion about that we really want to see a map drawn without that as a part of the equation, at least initially. We have the similar language to Senator Kiffmeyer, but we say plus or minus 1%. Senator Kiffmeyer says plus or minus 2. I believe 2 has been somewhat the norms at times. I want to see us be as close as we can to 1% as possible. We see subdivision 6 convenient and contiguity as required by the Constitution. However, we have compactness down lower. And so we'll get into that in a little bit, but we see those two things being very important. Where we have a major deviation from Senator Kiffmeyer, and something that I think requires us to take note, is that we talk about American Indian reservations shall not be split unless absolutely necessary. And the idea is that we have to understand that they, in my mind, at least in our mind, are kind of a separate political subdivision based on their legal status in our country. And it's something that I think hasn't been given its due in the past. And I think one could maybe make the argument that they should be included in the area where we talk about how we affect people of color and minorities. And we think that they should be drawn out a little separately on that. And so we think that's a pretty important thing. So we have that as our 7th subdivision. Obviously, we believe in subdivision 8 that counties, cities, townships should not be divided if possible. And then subdivision 9, we don't want to disperse or concentrate BIPOC community and we must comply with the 14th, 15th Amendment of the Constitution and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 as amended. And so we clearly see some of the same values there as talked about by Senator Kiffmeyer, and we believe that it's important that we make sure that there's a broad and equal representation the best we can in drawing the maps. We must identify and preserve communities of interest. Districts shall be structured into compact units. We put this much later because we find that this compactness question becomes somewhat subjective in some ways, and it's hard to drive that, I think, in a way that's consistent as much as we'd like, and therefore it's not going to rate as high for us on the scale of importance from beginning to end. And then, if possible, the cores of the current district should be preserved. The idea behind that is really looking at what the courts had done in the past, where they had the philosophy of changing as little as possible, but making the necessary changes where they needed to be, but not rewriting a whole new map unnecessarily. And so it's kind of a last one. We put that in as at the bottom end as being our last principle. This is the way we see it now. We think there's room for negotiation and discussions, and we're looking forward to that possibility as we move forward. Knowing that we're just laying them over right now, I think it's more of just an introduction to where we're at with it. I want to say that I hope there's an understanding there of why we broke compactness away from convenient and contiguity, why we added Native American tribes as their own subdivision, and then really trying to get even farther along in lines with, or farther along from what Senator Kiffmeyer was discussing in the idea of how we look at incumbents. We just don't want them to be a part of the equation when the maps are being drawn. Once we have that done, right, and we have these principles, we begin to ask the question, well, how do we know we did what we said we did, right? How do we know that we were able to solve the problems and create a map that we think reflects the best of what we have to offer here in Minnesota? And so we went and put in an evaluation section, and it kind of enumerates how we might evaluate these. And after the maps drop, we reevaluate by the redistricting committee for the following things. How well does the map preserve identified communities of interest? The consistency of the compactness score as much as possible. If the map would result in similar proportional representation of districts compared to statewide elections, and whether the map disproportionately burdens BIPOC, female, or incumbents of one party. And clearly, if we're being careful, if that were to happen, it would be an accident, and then that would be something the redistricting committee would have to come back and contend with. And at that point, we might see where we would look to see where addresses are, and along the same lines of what Senator Kiffmeyer said, find a way to remedy that with as little intrusion as possible to make sure there isn't an undue burden on those groups that we identify in the fourth part of the evaluation section. Finally, our bill requires several reports. And the idea behind this is that once the map is done, we want to be able to explain this map forward, backwards, upside down, sideways, whatever, and really think of it as different ways of looking at the map to ensure we did what we said we were going to do and to leave no stone unturned. So we have reports required for 10 areas: population equality, BIPOC, by voting age, contiguity, compactness, splits in political subdivisions, splits in native reservation land, communities of interest, change in core districts, incumbents, and components. And so the idea is that way we can leave a clear trail from beginning to end and really punctuate at the end with reports that demonstrate we did exactly what we said we were going to do. Our evaluations help us accomplish that and stay in line with that, and our reports will report when it's over that we accomplished what we set out to accomplish. And so that's kind of the plan here. I think it leaves, what we like about this bill is it leaves, I think, our public really comfortable knowing that not only do we have a really strong set of principles, but we have an evaluation process that guarantees those principles were followed, and a reporting process that demonstrates how those principles were followed and what those results of those principles were. And it's something that I feel as though puts the public in a spot where they can feel very confident that this was done in a way that we'd want this to be done. And despite the fact that people who are partisan by nature came together and really were able to do something that was outside of the norm of that kind of partisanship, and something they can be proud of. So that's, I could spend a lot more time really going on about a lot of the details, but I wanted to just kind of give you the overview of what we had. And I'd be happy to hear from anybody else in our caucus that will sign on to this bill if they think I missed anything or want to share something, but that's it.
All right, thank you, Senator Isaacson. Any further comments regarding the bill? Oh, Senator Kiffmeyer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Senator Isaacson. In particular, since the 1970s census, the Minnesota Supreme Court has decided Minnesota's redistricting plan. Has there been any evidence of the Minnesota Supreme Court engaging in intentional discrimination or partisan gerrymandering when establishing Minnesota's redistricting plan since 1970?
Senator Isaacson?
I'm sure not, that I'm aware of, unless you know of something that I don't.
Senator Kiffmeyer, follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I just think it speaks for itself that indeed is the case. So I wanted to also, just confirm that, Senator Isaacson, have there been any evidence that the Minnesota Supreme Court failed to apply neutral redistricting principles when the court established Minnesota's redistricting plan after the 2010 census?
Senator Isaacson?
Not to my knowledge. I feel like the question's going somewhere and I'm not sure I understand. If you could walk me through, that'd be helpful.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Kiffmeyer?
Yes, thank you very much, Senator Isaacson. You are correct. Basically, it's saying that if that is the case, if the redistricting plan established by the Minnesota Supreme Court after the 2010 census, and matter of fact, since 1970, by even your own comments, was fair and the court drew the map using neutral redistricting principles, why should we deviate from those principles?
Mr. Chair?
Senator Isaacson?
Because in this situation, these principles are drawn as if two partisan groups draw the map, and that's different, right? The courts have a responsibility that's different in some ways than our own. And because I can count on the courts to do that, doesn't mean that we can put 201 legislators together and make that same conclusion. And so therefore, we have these principles to guarantee that we don't go outside the guardrails either. Now, if the courts decide they're going to have it, right, that's up to them and they're going to make theirs, and that's not ours to say because now the courts have taken that. However, until that is the case, and if that is the case, then I think it's our job to be above reproach and to be transparent and really to have a set of principles that we can count on. And so I can't speak to what the court does. And I think if the court's doing a fabulous job, that's amazing. I'm really glad our system works that way. But unfortunately, if fortunately we're able to make those decisions, that I would want those guardrails to be in place.
Mr. Chair?
Thank you, Senator Isaacson. Senator Kiffmeyer?
Yes, if somebody else has a question, I'm glad to yield. Otherwise, I had another question.
Senator Kiffmeyer, looks like no questions, no other questions. So I'll give you that.
Senator Isaacson, it looks like it's you and I.
Well, that's great. Let's dance.
Right, very good. So I have another question. So how do you propose creating a map that uses proportionality to evaluate any redistricting plan? That is something totally new. And so question is, how does that proportionality work?
Are you referring to the, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair?
Senator Isaacson?
Thank you. Senator Kiffmeyer, are you referring to number 3 on the evaluation section of the bill? Is that right? Or I just want to make sure I'm in the right spot.
Mr. Chair, yes.
Senator Kiffmeyer?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's on page 3, beginning on line 17, and it's the parenthetical 3.
Thank you. So the concern I think we have here is we've seen in several states, and Wisconsin's probably the best example, where the number of votes received by a particular party doesn't match the number of seats that that party has in any given body, right? And so my concern would be that we'd have a map that allows for the votes to be high for one party, but doesn't match the amount of seats that party has in the legislature, because those things should be roughly or at least kind of close to each other. And we do see examples, and Wisconsin's probably one of the more notable ones, where we see one party gaining a lot of the votes, but having very few of the seats. And that's where we get into some of the gerrymandering problem. And so what this is a tool that helps us identify when we see a gerrymandering issue coming up. So for example, God forbid, we pulled a fast one on you and got a map through that we have, you know, you guys end up with 52% of the votes, but we end up with 55% of the seats, right? And that this proportionality does is it allows us to catch that ahead of time based on past elections and then not put ourselves in that spot in the future so we see it coming.
Mr. Chair. Well, I think my question was, how do you do that? How do you create a map? How does that work with proportionality? How does that
I'm
work?
sorry. I thought you asked me why. I apologize. Let me go back. That's my fault.
Why don't you go ahead?
I'm happy to fix that. So I think that part of it is that that's part of what our job is, to come up with what that rubric would look like. For us, what we're saying is when you look at statewide elections, right? And you could decide as a committee, we're going to pick the presidential election, or you could decide as a committee, we're going to pick 5 of the last 10 elections and average it out. And so we see a number of what is our statewide total for one party, the other, or for all 3 parties that we have, or 4, depending on how you look at it. And how do we match that when we look at what our current map looks like, what our future map looks like, and are we keeping on the same pace as that? So are we putting ourselves in a spot where if the map was drawn and you looked at the elections in the past, like for example, my understanding was in 2010, right, the Democrats lost the House and the Senate. If you were to have applied the maps drawn in 2012 to the 2010 legislature, the Democrats would not have lost the House. Right. And so we can use that same kind of measurement to look back and see. And that doesn't mean we have to change anything, but it does look and see how close are we to matching what the overall will is in terms of what the state looks like statewide. Right. And so that's what we would do. And part of it is that would be part of the negotiation process we would go through to decide exactly how would we want that to work? What kind of evaluation do we want to use? And together we could do that.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Kiffmeyer.
Yeah, I'm getting at how do you do that?
Mm-hmm. I think.
What is the process by which you do that? What is the how?
Senator Isaacson.
Yep. Let me try it again. Imagine, if you will, we get a map done, right? And once this map is done, we could run it where you can look at, based on population and election counts, you can run past elections through the map. So by having a generic D and a generic R. So we could maybe say your seat, for example, we could look at the number of votes you received in the last election, and then we could parcel out Republican and Democrat votes from the last election to the next election and look to see how close you were. And then we'd ask ourselves the question, when you look at the amount of vote statewide that one party is getting or the other party is getting, right? We can ask ourselves, are we getting somewhere near that? Right? So we don't create giant outliers. That's what we're trying to avoid. Or we don't have a situation where the Democrats pick up and have like 5 or 6 districts where we're going to win by 2 points, right? And then you guys run up the score in other places, and then there's not a balance. So the more votes were cast for you, but the other party has more seats in the legislature. We want there to be some semblance of balance. It doesn't need to be exact, but some semblance. So it's an evaluation process that tells us, are we going far afield of that? For example, if in the next election, right, you were to get 55% of the vote, but only have 45% seats, that's a problem. And you can do that by running past elections up and looking at the seats to get an idea of the direction that each district's trending and how does it match.
Mr. Chair.
You're on mute, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I'm sorry. We do have 2 testifiers as well. So once you're done with those questions, I don't want to forget about them or let them know that we
just have one more question, Mr. Chair. That's all.
Yes, continue, Senator Kiffmeyer.
Okay, so then when I read the principles here, we have the principles of, let's say, contiguous, compact, communities of interest. There's these other principles. So which one will govern? Does proportionality come first? How do you balance that, Senator Isaacson? I'm just interested in how you see that working in regards to that. So when there's tension between those, how does that work?
Mr. Chair, I want to just make sure. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, go ahead, Senator.
Thank you. Senator Kiffmeyer, I want to make sure you're asking me. So you're saying that when we're looking at these evaluations, how do we balance compactness against contiguity? Or how do we balance one of the principles against the other? Is that what you're asking me?
Senator Kiffmeyer?
Nope. No, I was asking you, how do you balance what you're talking about here, proportionality, and all the other principles? Which one is most important, or which one, how do you?
I get it. For us, and I think the language, and maybe I didn't say the language in the bill, it's in order, right? So when we're measuring and evaluating based on subdivision 6, that takes precedent over subdivision 9, right? And so it's in order. So that's how we would decide what's important. And so I suppose what I think you're asking, and if I'm not sure I'm getting it, is that we look at the principles in order. And as they're evaluated, the top ones are the most important. They become less important as you go down, or not quite as engaged that way. And so the idea is that obviously I'm worried about making sure we follow the Constitution first, if that was an evaluation. And as we move through it, the lesser evaluations become important once we've solved for the top ones.
Senator Kiffmeyer?
Mr. Chair. Yeah, that's it for now, Mr. Chair. I'm still not sure about the how process and other issues, but I will gladly have testifiers, and I think we can move on from this round of questions, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. I do have a question from Senator Murphy. Senator Murphy?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And briefly, and this is a question as a new member of the Redistricting Committee, I haven't done this before, but as I understand it from a decade ago, that once the principles are set and agreed to, this ordering, this drawing of maps is something that, because of our ability now to use computers and technology, that the principles are a part of the test of the maps that are drawn. And if I am misunderstanding that, let me know. But it seems to me that the heart of the matter for us today is the discussion of the principles. And that when we have finally agreed to those, that those principles are going to be applied over and over again as various maps by different parties are being considered. And the order is important, but the how is really the technology that's behind this. And if I've got that wrong, correct me. But I think, as I understand it, that's the way this works.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. Yeah, I would agree, but I do have kind of a follow-up too, also on the how, Senator Isaacson, if I may ask. So Section 3, we're evaluating the maps based on the criteria laid out in Section 2. Mm-hmm. It almost seems like Section 3 creates a new and overriding list of priorities to me when I'm just looking at that, because if it doesn't follow some certain degree of, whichever category it is there, does this override if the principles in Section 2, or how do they play off of each other?
Sure. Yeah. I think when I wrote this, that was clear to me, but I can see now as you read it, that might not seem clear. So I think that's a fair question. And let me walk you through that. In my mind, the principles are the bedrock, right? That's the guiding. That's the part. The evaluations, when I think the word evaluate means we look at this and ask ourselves the question, did we do what we said we did? That's what the evaluation is. And then we can ask ourselves, and if we feel like we did, then we're good, right? If we didn't feel like we did, then we got to go back and look. But this will help us indicate where maybe we didn't. And so for me, the principles are obviously the guide, right? And the evaluation is to ask ourselves the question, did we accomplish what we said we were going to accomplish? And if we didn't, like, let's say we find that the map puts several people of color in a position of being redistricted together, and it was just a fluke accident, just the way it was written. Or maybe we put like 4 Republican senators in one district in greater Minnesota, right? And we didn't mean to do that, but it happens. Now we evaluate it. We can ask ourselves a question, is this going to be a problem for us? I would argue, regardless if it was the minority members, the Republicans, yeah, that's not acceptable, right? But we didn't intend to do it. So now the evaluation helps us to conclude that that's the case. And so that's all the evaluation is meant to do, is be our judgment of whether or not we think we filled up the principles as we thought we were going to. It doesn't override or tell the principals they don't count anymore. It's to let us know, did we match what we think we did? And so I think there's a subjective element to that within the committee. And if I am wrong about that assumption of what the committee does, then I would love to be corrected. But for me, I don't understand how once we draw a map, if we don't have an evaluation process, how we would know we did what we said we were going to do, right? And I think having a set evaluation system in place is much more transparent for people who want to follow along what we're doing, rather than us just sitting around looking at maps and deciding if it's good or not. Do I think these 4 evaluations are the only 4? Am I open to having more or changing them so they're better reflecting what we think as a group we should do? Absolutely, I am. I want, this is our first attempt at this, and we know that there could be other ideas. So does that help that a little bit, or?
That does. No, and I appreciate that. I think that's good to reflect on the work that we've done. My question, and you've answered it fairly well, but let's look at line 3.12, where we're talking about, that's the number one thing on the evaluations. So this is about preserving communities of interest. I'm just picking one out of here.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But then when I turn it over here and I look, so communities of interest is subsection 10. On section 2, it's subsection 10. So if let's say we didn't do very well on preserving communities of interest, but we did the other things very well that are higher rated, what does that mean? Do we have to go back and reevaluate the map, or does that change what we're actually focusing on in our principles?
I think you ask what's been fascinating about this process is once I started, I'm like, yeah, let's throw some maps together. This would be great, right? 6 months ago. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, there are so many layers to how we figure that out. And how do we put those layers in an order of priority so we hit our most important and keep as close to that as possible as we go through? So for me, I'd be open to that discussion, but my instinct would be to say that we need to make sure we're satisfying those principles as much as we can, starting with the tops as being the most important and we're working our way through. In your question, it sounds like you're saying, let's say, and I think it was subdivision 10, we find that subdivision 10 isn't as much as maybe we would feel is right, but the first 9 we really get down. Do we have to go back and relook at subdivision at the rest of them to hit subdivision 10? My assumption would be that we need to go back and make sure we hit as many of those as we can. And if that means we have to tweak some stuff beforehand, I imagine that's kind of the sausage making of map building, right? So that'd be my guess. And what I guess would be interesting to know is people who've done this in the past and really spent time with it. I mean, what process do you have in place that really tells us that as we go forward? So for me, we felt like that process should be maybe enumerated out more. And knowing that maybe hasn't been done in the past, we might have missed something, or we might add something, or we put something in that's too burdensome. That's a good conversation to have.
Sure. Well, thank you, Senator Isaacson. I don't see any other questions up right now. So let's turn over to our testifiers. I have Mr. Alan Roy first on the list from the White Earth Nation. Mr. Roy, if you're on.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is Secretary Treasurer Alan Roy.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my name is Secretary Treasurer Alan Roy from the White Earth Nation here in northwest Minnesota, up near Fargo, Moorhead, Detroit Lakes area. I do want to thank Senator Kiffmeyer and Senator Isaacson for introducing some of the principles that are important for us here as the state considers redistricting here. But I do want to reiterate that you guys talk about the communities of interest, and certainly, tribal communities. We have folks all over the state, and my vested interest in this is there's, as Senator Isaacson had stated, there's specific mention and treatment of American Indian reservations, and to as the redistricting is happening, that those reservations be taken into consideration, unless absolutely necessary when you go through that list. I do want to remind the committee, Mr. Chair, that the U.S. Constitution cites treaties with tribal nations as the supreme law of the land. Native Americans are trilateral citizens, We are citizens of the United States. We are citizens of our respective states, and we are citizens of our respective tribal nations and communities. And so as you guys move forward, I do appreciate the fact that you guys are taking us into consideration. And very briefly, I just feel that a lot of our Native American veterans, 25% of our folks serve in the armed forces. We weren't afforded voting rights until after we became citizens in the early 19th century, or early 1900s, I should say. And so a lot of folks have made a lot of sacrifices for us to get here today. So I'll conclude my remarks here, Mr. Chair. But thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roy. Appreciate your testimony today. It's great to have you here. We'll move on to Robert Hayter from Take Action, Minnesota. Mr. Hayter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chair Johnson and members of the committee, my name is Robert Hayter, and I'm the Policy Director at Take Action Minnesota. We are a grassroots, multiracial people's organization that believes in a state that works for all of us and where nobody is left out. With our members, we advocate for policies that promote a people-centered democracy, justice, and fairness. We are here today in support of Senate File 2308, which will ensure that every voter can make their voice heard through fair, nonpartisan maps. A final redistricting bill that includes Section 1 as well as Section 2, Subdivision 4, will ensure that voters can select their elected officials rather than having elected officials select their own voters. Further, within Section 2 of Senate File 2308, we appreciate the intent to preserve the integrity of American Indian reservations and the priority given to BIPOC communities who have historically been ignored altogether, or as is more often the case, have been taken advantage of in the democratic process. By centering these communities and giving them priority above principles of compactness and preserving cores of prior districts, Senate File 2308 would lift up their voice and give them a say. Our democracy is under attack across the nation, and we can take a step forward or toward protecting it with more transparency and accountability and drawing new legislative and congressional maps. At this pivotal moment, we can fortify our democracy by bringing more transparency into the process, or we can once again settle for the status quo. A true democracy for the people starts with lines on the map, but along with those lines must come transparency and accountability. In an ideal world, we would see an independent commission in charge of the redistricting process to achieve actual nonpartisanship, transparency, and accountability. Short of that, though, we do not believe that Senate File 1715 goes far enough on these counts, so we encourage you to support Senate File 2308. Our organization wants to thank the committee for your work on this issue. Thank you for your time today, and we hope that we can continue to work with you all as this process moves forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hayter. Appreciate it. Any questions for testifiers today? Okay. Seeing none, we have reached the end of the agenda. So I think we will just, at this point, we'll call the meeting, but stand by, in the next couple of weeks or so, we should be getting out a schedule for some of the hearings that we're going to be doing this summer, whether it's Zoom, a hybrid of hitting the road, getting out, but really looking forward to getting out and just hearing from different communities about their redistricting needs and their needs of representation. So with that, folks, have a good night. Oh, sorry, Senator Kunish.
Thank you. Your comment gave me a question. Would you anticipate that would be a bipartisan activity, or that are you anticipating that your GOP redistricting team will do their thing and we would do ours, or are you kind of hoping that we will do this together?
Well, I certainly hope that we'll do this together. We're going to be doing this formally from the perspective of the committee. Mm-hmm. And we will have all committee members invited, and we'll be doing this jointly. So we want to make sure that this is as open and fair as possible, and that's the only way that I can see that we can do that. So, Senator Kunish.
And then if we have, let's say, certain communities or certain areas of the state ask for us to visit them and have those kind of communications, will we take that into consideration when you decide our route around the state?
Certainly.
Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Murphy has a question, and so do I.
Oh, I don't know why I'm not seeing you on the screen here. Do you have,
We have our hands
there
up.
it is.
Mhm.
All right, Senator Murphy.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I wanted to make sure and thank Secretary Treasurer Roy and Mr. Hyder from Take Action for testifying. And thank you for holding the hearing here before the end of the session. And I also wanted to make sure that we had moved to lay over Senate File 2308.
I'm sorry. Yes, that was the motion. So that is laid on the table, or it's laid over. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Senator Isaacson.
Yep,
did you
and
have further
I'm
comment?
I'm gonna follow up on Senator Kunesh's question. I'm just wondering, when you put this together, are you and I gonna sit down and talk about this, or did your staff create the list of where we're gonna go? Obviously, we'd like to have some input in that and where we go, and clearly, we're very interested in being a part of that and having that kind of a moment where we get to go out there and hear from people and see these different groups. And then second question is I'm really hoping we take the time to really dig into the fishing community, and it'd probably be good to be in some boats and talking to some fishermen while we're out there. I think that's important to Mille Lacs and other places. I don't know that they feel underrepresented to me a lot. And
Yeah.
I don't want them to feel that way. And so if they need some love, I'm prepared to do that with my boat.
You
if
know,
it's needed.
Senator Isaacson, I hadn't thought about that, but that's really been a community that's been ignored. So we've got a good lake up north,
Yeah.
Lake of the Woods. So let's go do that.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks for the suggestion. So I think with that, yeah, and actually, I'll get back to the substance of your question there. Let's do that. Let's communicate and see, because you're working with different groups, so we want to make sure that we're open to anybody that wants to put in some comments. We'd love to do that. So
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
you bet. All right. With that, committee, we are now adjourned. Thank you for your time.